my fellow readers. This is I, Dark Symphony 777, with another fan fiction review. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the channel, subscribe to like the video, subscribe to my channel, click on that bell for notifications, and leave a comment to the comment section below on your thoughts of the story and any future fan fictions you want me to review. And as always, these are my opinions. My opinions are not indicative of everyone in the world. So, wrestling, professional wrestling, where the big sweaty men beat up and the hot, sexy, near naked chicks slap each other. No, wait, no, that was like 5 years. That was like 10 years ago in WWE. And we go to Japan to see a guy wrestle with moves based off video games and look like Albert Wesker. And also a guy in a mask calling Princess Peach and Tramp and stuff like that. So, wrestling. What does that have to do with my fan fiction? Well, if you actually paid attention, a couple times in previous videos I mentioned don't read the wrestling fan fictions. I'll kind of mention that in a different video I'm going to be doing. But as everyone will tell you, there are exceptions to the rule. And this is going to be the exception. And I need to get a new laptop, a new head camera. That's what I'm going to get my next paycheck. That's the big thing I'm going to get my next paycheck is a new camera. And the Saria shirt. So, big exception in this video. The video, I'm going to be reviewing a story called Storm Warning, written by Jay Winger, I believe. Hold on. I accidentally. What's his name? J2K Winger. It's a wrestling. It's a wrestling fan fiction, and it very much proves the exception to the rule. Because if you actually go on the wrestling fan fiction, you'll see a whole bunch of the same old things over and over and over and over and over and over. You get a chick who is like near perfect, either a borderline or a complete Mary Sue, falling in love with their favorite wrestler, usually John Cena or Randy Orton or Dean Ambrose or Seth Rollins or The Undertaker back in like early 2000s, or Shawn Michaels or Jeff Hardy, or pretty much just name a wrestler. It's more than likely that someone written themselves into a story to fall in love with that wrestler. It's either that or it's Yowie. It's just like Yowie. Why is there so much Yowie? Yowie, okay. Straight note Yowie plus Mpreg. Wow. But there are exceptions to the rule. And Storm Warning is a very, very good exception to the rule. Why? Because for one thing, this is the oldest fanfiction I think I'm going to be able to review on the site. How old? The story was created all the way back in October of 2000. Let me put this in perspective. Fanfiction.net came out in October of 1998. The story is old, especially by fanfiction standards. Wow. Oh my God, this story is old. Especially it's written by someone who's actually still writing fanfictions. He's actually still J2K Winger. I believe he actually had a different name. It's the same thing. I think it was J2K or Y2K Winger. I believe he was called something else. First time I read this story, way back in like 2013. But, it's 5 years later. He's still writing fanfic. He actually wrote a fanfiction like last year. Yeah, he actually wrote a fanfiction, last year. Not all who we are fallen are lost. What is this? Destiny fic. But yeah, he's, as far as I know, Jay Winger, is the last bastion, the last writer from the halcyon days of fanfiction.net. He's probably one of the original. He was probably there since the beginning, since fanfiction.net started, for all I know. Because just because you haven't written anything doesn't mean you haven't been there. For all we know, he could have been there from the very beginning. He's probably a big time moderator on the site, for all I know. I mean, there's so many questions that have to be answered. I mean, who knows? Maybe, I don't know. If he's up to it, I may just ask him a couple questions, like, how you doing? What's your name? Jay? Like, do you like wrestling? Yeah, I like wrestling. Which is kind of a shame, because I think he stopped writing wrestling fans because they kind of devolved into these one or two note styles, either yaoi or / yaoi and mpreg, or just carbon copy and paste, Mary Sue-esque self-insert fan fictions of chicks hooking up with their favorite wrestlers. You rarely find anything outside of those two contained. I mean, there's the only notable ones I can think of are Storm Warning and its sequel, which I'm gonna do in a different video, and the ATM the very, very huge ATM franchise, fanfiction franchise, which is like completely huge. I mean, seriously, that stuff, but it's like very religious, and I don't know whether or not it would be beneficial to read this, because then I have like a whole bunch of ridiculous, like, that's overly religious, that's zealot-is. Tell me, do you think I should do a review of the ATM series and all the subsequent series too? But let's get started with the review. So, what's the plot? The plot is actually pretty self-explanatory. The plot in its simplest form is actually the synopsis of the story. It's basically just a wrestler named The Storm comes into WWE on his stories and trials and tribulations. Let me get what's, because this guy came in, okay. Where is it? Storm Warning: The Chronicles of the Storm, a new wrestler in the WWF and his various feuds and matches. That is literally the entire story. It's basically just that synopsis. That synopsis said it better than I ever could. Right? And this is coming from someone who's a big-time wrestling fan. I've been wrestling since 97. I know I'm getting off topic but I love wrestling. I have to bring this up. My first memory of watching professional wrestling was actually during the Monday Night Wars. My grandfather was actually going through the channel. He was channel surfing. I was staying up because I had the day off. I wasn't feeling well, so my grandfather's like, "Oh, you want to watch something? We'll just watch something together." And my grandfather's going through the channels like really fast, and we actually go by World Championship Wrestling (WCW), and I see a clip of Lionheart Chris Jericho talking to a cardboard cutout of the Iceman Dean Malenko, and that was actually my first memory of watching wrestling. I actually asked my grandfather, "Can you go back to like the guy talking to the?" It's like, what, to the guy in the ring? I was like, you mean wrestling? And he turned back the channel and we saw Chris Jericho just talking to a picture of Dean Malenko. At the time, I didn't know who they were because it was the middle of the promo. I was like, and I asked my grandfather, "Who was that? And what is he doing?" My grandfather, I'm dead serious. This is what he said, with the straightest face. I said, "That's what happens when you don't go to college and you go crazy, son." It's like, okay. And I still have fun memories of that. But yeah, Chris Jericho, I love Chris Jericho. Ever since that one moment, I fell in love with Chris Jericho. He's still my favorite. He will forever be my favorite wrestler of all time. Step aside Steve Austin, step aside The Rock, step aside The Undertaker, Kenny Omega, Kazuchika Okada, all your wrestlers, Ayako Hamada, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want, all the wrestlers. Chris Jericho is the man. He's the Alitoya of rock and roll. He is the man of 1,004 holds. Most of them just happens to be arm bars. I still remember that. Arm bar! Sorry, I'm getting off topic. So anyway, back to the plot. That's pretty much in terms of the plot, it's pretty much it. It's just this guy named the Storm. That because he has a gimmick that he likes weather phenomenon, and it's just him coming into WWF and going through all these feuds with these wrestlers and stuff like that. And there's a lot of revisionism going on. For one thing, Kane wins the Royal Rumble. He really should have done that in 2001. I believe this story kind of starts either in late '99 or late 2000 because the story goes through 2 WrestleManias, and I'm guessing. I'm just completely guessing. It's 2000. I'm more leaning towards it happens in late 2000 because during the lead up to the first WrestleMania match, which was a TLC match, they mentioned it was the second ever TLC match, and I know the first TLC match happened at SummerSlam 2000. At least I believe so. Yeah, it was SummerSlam 2000, so it's like it goes from late 2000 all the way to early 2001. No, 2002. Which kind of like I'm thinking, wait, where's the WCW invasion? And I'm like, okay, it's probably revisionism. It's probably like, fuck the invasion. That's probably what Jay Winger kind of had in mind. It's like, this is a train wreck. I'm not gonna write about this. There's too much going on already. And basically, what happens in the story is, first off, it starts off with vignettes, which is basically just Storm and his Texan voice kind of yelling at people and stuff like that. This is your Storm warning. And then he wrestles Taz. He feuds with Taz. And he starts out as a face. Face is wrestling terminology for a good guy. And then he teams up with Chris Benoit. I'll talk about Chris Benoit later because I got to talk about him when I'm talking about, when the moment I mention Benoit, I got to talk about him, at least separately. And then he turns heel, which is wrestling terminology for a bad guy. And then he teams up with Chris Benoit. He gets the tag team championships from Edge and Christian, and then they lose them at WrestleMania in the second TLC match to the Hardy Boys. Benoit backstabs Storm, knocks him out, passes him, causes him to pass out. Storm turns face again, and then for the majority of the story, he's feuding with Chris Benoit and the Radicals and Triple H, but mostly Benoit. And then along that way, he creates Lone Star, which is a faction. A faction is a group in wrestling. It's like a group of wrestlers who kind of team up. Called Lone Star, which is based off all the wrestlers being from Texas, which I admittedly thought, even back then, it even sounds cool now. Having a whole bunch of wrestlers kind of team up because they think their state's better than all their states. It's a neat form of Jiganism, not Jiganism, nationalism. Like you have the anti-Americans like all throughout wrestling history. It's like my country's better, but it's like you have a wrestler who constantly brags about their state being better than like all the other states. Bret Hart kind of did a variation of that in 1997 where he said, "Oh, I hate everyone. I only hate the American people. Everyone else loves me." And he gets cheered, and like every time when WWE did a show that wasn't in the United States, he got cheered like he's Messiah of wrestling. And Bret Hart is up there as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. He's not Chris Jericho though. Yeah, you're gonna see a lot of Chris Jericho favoritism here. Yeah. But he get booed whenever he wrestled in America. So it's kind of like that, but just confined to the United States. But just one state. It's like, oh, Florida is good. Texas is better. Texas has this. Texas has King of the Hill. But that's a cartoon. It still takes place in Texas. Everything's better in Texas. Yeah. Not to mention at the time, like 2000, there was a whole bunch of wrestlers from Texas. We had the APA, we had Jacqueline, we had Steve Austin, we had Eddie Guerrero, we had Shawn Michaels, but he was kind of on leave at the time. We had Undertaker. During the Biker Taker days, he registered himself as from Houston rather than Death Valley. He kind of went back to that once he became the Undead Taker again. But there was a lot of wrestlers from Texas, so I'm like, why didn't they think of, when I first read the story, I'm like, why didn't they, that's actually a pretty cool idea. Why didn't they go with that idea? And now back to the plot. And when he forms Lone Star, he keeps staying heel, but then he kind of turns into a pseudo heel. When he gets the Intercontinental Championship from Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit wins King of the Ring. Chris Benoit, they feud until like about nearly the end when Storm turns. Storm kind of turns Tweener. Tweener is basically terminology for anti-hero, kind of like the middle. You have face on one side good, heel on the other bad, and you have Tweener, which is right in the middle. Stone Cold Steve Austin is probably the biggest example of a tweener wrestler. You also have Kevin Nash. You also have kind of sort of Austin Aries. Right now you have Becky Lynch. Becky Lynch is it would probably be the most modern, probably the easy example you're probably going to find outside of Steve Austin. I guess you can kind of count Chris Jericho because he's so good at playing both heel and face. Like people will cheer him either way, but still boo him when he wants them to boo him. So I guess kind of, sort of. But right now he's in Japan about to wrestle Tetsuya Naito. But that's beside the point. And the story ends in a self-contained crossover chapter with another writer, where Storm and the other writer, Boulder's name, I believe his name was, Viper, they wrestle for the Intercontinental Championship, and Viper wins, and so that sets up the events for the sequel, Raging Storm. And I really need to get a new chair too, because this thing squeaks way too much. So, what do I think of the plot? I think, for one thing, it's such a weird, abnormal plot because it doesn't follow typical novel storyline, because it's literally a bunch of mini stories kind of contained in in this one large narrative of the first 2 years of Storm's wrestling. So it's really, really weird in that sense. It's a good weird, but I still have to at least call it out for still being weird. I just like it because, if this was any other story outside of wrestling, then I would hate it. I would actually dissect it and trash it to high hell. But since it's wrestling, the author, it kind of works in this sort of weird kayfabe sense. Kayfabe is another wrestling terminology. I can't remember that off the top of my head. Kayfabe is basically, when a wrestler kind of goes into the wrestling ring, they have to make everything believable. They have to make it, oh, this is a real contest, and then Vince McMahon kind of did this because he wanted to save on taxes, and he's like, no, I'm Vince McMahon. This is not wrestling. This is predetermined. Yeah, give me money, yeah. And Vince McMahon, he loves the money. He loves the cha-ching. Characters. There are so many characters, but the main two we're gonna focus on is Storm and Chris Benoit, because they have the most screen time, I guess you can kind of say, and thus kind of get the most development over the course of the story. Storm, I kind of like Storm, but at the same time I kind of hate Storm. This is more of a hindsight thing, because in the first story he's kind of bland. He kind of comes off as a Steve Austin knockoff. Steve Austin has the overall badass, I don't give no fucks about anyone's attitude, while Storm has a thing for mentioning weather phenomenon. But in terms of personality, they kind of behave the same. And even the author says, "Oh yeah, we kind of borrowed bits and pieces from certain wrestlers." He mentioned that in the sequel. Storm does become a better character in the sequel, hence why I have a love-hate relationship with him, because on the first story he's not bad, but he could be much better. But he becomes a much better rounded, all-rounded character in the sequel, Raging Storm. But again, that's gonna be a different video. So, but if I had to base it on just Storm Warning by itself, he's an okay character. He does go from face heel over the course of the story. Again, just like the plot. If it was anything outside of wrestling, I would completely tear it a new one. But it works because of how wrestling works. Because, because of how wrestlers, they constantly turn heel, they constantly turn face. You never know when it's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to happen. So it makes sense from a wrestling standpoint. That Storm enters as a good guy. He feuds with Taz. And then he teams up with Benoit, turns heel. Then he feuds with Benoit, turns face. Then he makes Lone Star, and then at the end he turns heel again. And in Raging Storm, he's pretty much just a face the entire time, except at the very, very beginning. But I have to stop mentioning that. Is there any way to get this? I wish there was some way to get this chair just standing still. And we get to now in terms of characters, we get to the elephant in the room, and that is Benoit. Now the reason I said Benoit is a big elephant is there's a phrase called "never say never," and that's a big one in WWE, saying that with anyone who kind of burns their bridges, sooner or later, after enough time, that wrestler's going to come back. Whether something's happened. It happened with Bruno Sammartino. It happened with Jeff Jarrett, which was a big shocker because we thought Jeff Jarrett was literally going to be the only person who would never happen to. And it's like, Jeff Jarrett for the Hall of Fame. It's like, whoa, Jeff Jarrett. The guy Vince McMahon fired legitimately in the middle of Raw. I was like, what? It happens. It hasn't happened to Scott Steiner yet because it's Scott Steiner. We all know he wrestled a lot of countries. Yeah, we know that Scott. We know that Steiner. He wrestled a lot of countries. But Benoit is guaranteed to be the only one to follow through with the never say never because he's dead. Well, first off, he's dead, and this is probably my one or two only complaints is the fact the story has not aged well because of Benoit. But this is more of another hindsight thing because I'm pretty sure Jay Winger never expected what happened in 2007. So before I continue on, let me at least explain that. Chris Benoit is a Canadian wrestler who is known for his very, very intense persona. He wasn't a good talker, but he admitted that. So he had this very intense wrestling style, reminiscent of the Dynamite Kid. But Dynamite Kid was a complete other jackass. Well, I guess you can kind of say Benoit now too, because there's so many accusations saying, oh, Benoit was not really a nice person either. But a lot of people point out the fact that Eddie Guerrero's death kind of got to him, and he kind of got crueler over the time before his death. Basically, what happened was Benoit was scheduled to wrestle CM Punk for the ECW Championship, but Benoit never showed up. This happened in about fall of 2007, I believe. And then it was discovered that him, his wife, and his son were dead, and Benoit himself was hung. And so Vince McMahon went into overdrive and scheduled a funeral show. Whenever a big time wrestler dies, they have some kind of show honoring the wrestler. And then halfway through the show, it was discovered Benoit murdered his wife and kid and then hung himself. So it's like, ew, we done goofed. And so Vince McMahon literally wiped Benoit off the face of wrestling history. He covered his tracks. Anyone who mentions Benoit or has any footage of Benoit, WWE will immediately take down that video. You have to go into the dark web to find any footage of Benoit. Even on the WWE network, if you mention Benoit in the search engine, you'll say, sorry, that person does not exist. And you literally have to dig through specific episodes you can remember that Benoit might be on. And even then, any episode that has Benoit has, there's gonna be stuff that there's gonna be someone, we don't really want to talk about, but he did bad things, and so and so this is a warning for those people who didn't like what happened, and it had a picture, and I believe it has a picture of Benoit on it, saying, yeah, this is what we were talking about. But yeah, Benoit was effectively wiped from history. unless you were a big time wrestling fan who kind of knew about Benoit, that was like the only way you would really remember him. And even like this big encyclopedia where it had a bunch of wrestlers, they even had a tiny bit about Benoit, which everyone was surprised about, but no one was surprised. Like, it was literally just a little addendum to, like, oh yeah, we have to mention Benoit. We have no choice in this situation, but they kept it as small as literally possible. They didn't have any pictures, I believe. A lot of people kind of, his body was sent. His brain at the autopsy was described as a 70-year-old with Alzheimer's, I believe. Here's my theory on why Benoit did what he did. He was more than likely suffering from Alzheimer's. And he completely forgot about who his wife and kids were. He thought they were intruders. He murdered them. And then his memory kind of came back in a moment of clarity. And he kind of hung himself out of guilt. Do I think that's the right theory? Probably not. But it's the only theory I can think of why he would kill. Why would he kill his wife and kid? That's the only thing I can think of. Is Alzheimer's, messes with the hippocampus and destroys the memory bit by bit. So it's possible that he completely forgot that that he was even married, or he knew who Nancy Benoit and their son was. There's so many factors to play into that. I could probably make a video just talking about Benoit with my friends in general. Comment in the comment section. Do you think I should do a video about Benoit? Because that would actually be a cool video to talk about. Yeah, maybe I would have to convince my friend, because I don't want to do a video by myself. But anyway, Benoit at the time, and his story takes place years before his death, years before the murder-suicide. So it's like, it hasn't aged well, because people who kind of go to the back, they find this story, they read Benoit, and it's like, this has Benoit in it. It's like, I don't want to read it anymore. But this is more of a consequence of hindsight. The author could not have known that this was going to happen. And honestly, Benoit was a good wrestler. I'm not going to lie. Benoit was a very good wrestler. He was one of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time. He's up there with Kurt Angle. He's up there with Daniel Bryan. He was up there. He was up there. And I'm kind of dragging this on too long. Point is, the author should not have known. And do I want to change Benoit out of the story? No, because this story is a relic of its time. The author would not have known. The author should never, and the author should really not change this. Edit Benoit, because he would be copying Vince McMahon's. Like, we must erase this guy. But those are the two main characters. A bunch of other wrestlers. There's Steve Austin. There's the Acolytes, the APA. There are actually a lot of small details scattered throughout the story. Like during a match, the Storm is wrestling with teaming with DX against the Radicals. Dean Malenko has a clover leaf on Road Dogg, and Road Dogg just goofing off. He's like, yeah, it doesn't hurt. Yeah, I mean, I'm impressive, but it doesn't hurt. And Storm actually references Owen Hart, rip Owen Hart, and fuck his wife, because Owen Hart should be in the Hall of Fame. Just saying that. And there's even signs like I'll get more into the signs and pacing stuff when I get to pacing. Grammar, there's nothing wrong. I couldn't find anything wrong grammar wise. And this is something from, I'm guessing the author was probably a kid when he wrote this. I'm just guessing because 18 years is a long time. I'm just guessing how old the author is. So he's probably either a kid or a teenager when he wrote the story. And for a 18-year-old story, it actually holds up pretty well in terms of grammar, in terms of pacing, in terms of plot and stuff like that. Pacing. There is a lot of small details. There's Storm going once in a while. He'd look out and they actually show signs. Once in a while, very rarely, I'll actually have some commentary from Jim Ross or Michael Cole or Jerry Lawler. And in terms of pacing, whenever we have to go fast forward, we don't just the author actually doesn't skip ahead. The author will actually have a brief montage of everything that's been happening in WWE, which is a really nice touch. It's a really it's a small detail, because if you're not a wrestling fan, you're probably gonna be confused with like what this montage is about. What this montage about? What's happening at all these wrestling events and shows and all these title changes, stuff like that. What's happening? What's happening? But if you're a wrestling fan, you kind of know the intricacies. This is a really very important detail that the author put in, saying, "Oh yeah, Storm's injured. You know, let's talk about let's talk about everything that's happened before Storm coming back, so that way you are caught up with like anything that might change." And I thought that was a really cool detail. And the only problem I had with the pacing was during the multi-man matches. Now, the single-man matches I had no problem with. They're paced really, really weirdly. Again, this is a more consequence of the universe is in. With wrestling, you know, there are squash matches, there are really good competitive matches, there are like technical stuff. So the pacing will constantly change throughout each match, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know that a match might go longer than normal, it might go shorter than normal. So I have no problem with the pacing of the single matches and how the matches are structured. Generally, it's literally the wordplay of any match that has more than two people, because for some reason, I don't know why, because the author kind of words it very weirdly in multi-man matches. Plus, with the nature of multi-man matches in general, it's going to be very, very hard to pace everything completely right 100% of the time. You're going to get something wrong, and you're gonna get yourself kind of thrown in a loop. That's understandable. I can't complain about that, because you know this is more something that's out of the author's hands than anything else with how wrestling works. And I'm also thankful that if I wasn't a wrestling fan, I'd probably be destroying the tag team matches completely a new one. I'd be tearing them a new one because how janky some of them are. Because a lot of the tag team matches in the story are really, really janky. I have no problem with the single man matches, but as you get more and more people, it gets really, really weird. Like it gets really, really like the wording's kind of all over the place. It's still grammared fine, but it's just it's really hard to keep track of overall. But again, it's wrestling. I can't complain too much about it. So it is what it is. Would I So we got overall the main review over with. Would I recommend this story? This one's kind of a hard one, because overall this is a wrestling story for wrestling fans, because you're not going to get a very coherent story out of it. The pacing is all over the place. The characters are all over the place. So I have to make this one kind of middle ground, because if you're a wrestling fan, then go read it. Go ahead and read it. But if you're not a wrestling fan, I can't recommend it. What? I hate my little brother. I'm gonna... Where was I? Great, now I lost my train of thought. I seriously lost my train. Oh, wait. Now I remember. If you're a wrestling fan, then yeah, go read this one. If you're not a wrestling fan, then give this story a hard pass. Favorite. Sorry, I'm thinking to myself out loud now. Favorite part. I don't really have a favorite part. I guess maybe the ideal Lone Star, but no. My favorite part would have to be the concept. I was like forever and a half. I was looking for a fan fiction. Like, can I get one wrestling fan fiction that's not about really, really bad romance done like Storm Warning. Oh, wait. The story of Storm and his various feuds, and it's like, is this a wrestling fan fiction about wrestling fans? And I clicked on it. It's like, it is. Yes. So I guess that can kind of be considered my favorite part, just for the fact that this story exists at all, and it's a wrestling fan fiction for wrestling fans, not fans of romance or yaoi up the wazoo. And I guess that's it. Now, final thoughts. I really like this story. Honestly, I find Raging Storm to be a much better story. It has a better plot. The characters are better. I'll get more into that when I get to the review of that story. So this has been Dark Symphony 777. And this story is done. I'm gonna go read a book. I jumped the gun, didn't I? I just realized I started reading this. There. I started reading this and I just realized I didn't stop the recording. Huh.